The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is André. I will be your podcast host. Big thanks to Uka the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers. And big thanks to you, gentle listener, for tuning in to another episode. Today, we talk with Keith Grachow, who is a very cool comic illustrator, worked on books, a lot of other things, and some very neat projects, which we get into as we chat. He's another one of the living in Toronto, the really talented pool of artists and writers and folk in Toronto, and we talk about that a little bit. One thing that he did mention in our conversation, which you will hear, is that he did a little digging on me, I guess, and talked with David Cutler, who is my former roommate, friend, and, guest of the show, works for Marvel currently, to check in on me, because I'd asked him, I believe Davin may have asked him about doing the show, and he checked in, and Dave had nothing but nice things to say, which is very nice, and much appreciated. Doing shows like this, you're kind of hoping to get out there as much as possible, get great guests, great conversations, and get people listening. And when people that have been in the show have nice things to say about it and can pass on to their fellow creators to entice them to come, it means a lot, and it really helps with acquiring some pretty cool folks to be in the show. So big thanks to people like Dave, and Dave specifically, for putting that out there and helping get the word out. So it's much appreciated. Dave's a great guy and an amazing artist, so you got to check out his work as well as Keith's, which we get to chatting about what he does exactly throughout the show. Great conversation, very cool guy. And I never know where these talks are going to go. Sometimes, you get into it and you get off on a little tangent. Sometimes you kind of stick to the basics. Sometimes it's a little free flow of both. And, getting to chat with him about some of the aspects of his work and some of the connection to some of his early books and some of his that's connected to his heritage and his upbringing and stuff is very cool. So great chat with Keith, and very much enjoyed that, and I hope you do as well. That is coming in just a moment's time. One thing I do want to let you know is I've recently been listening to, which has just been released on Apple and all the Apple Music and all the music platforms, the soundtrack to X-Men 97. It's fantastic. I know on our other podcast, X-Rated, the X-Men Anime Review Show, which I do with Davin, we talk about that show, and he recently posted on our site that the soundtrack's available on the different streaming platforms, and man, oh man, it's great. It's so good. I'm really hoping they do a vinyl release at some point so I can add that to the collection, but check it out. The Newton brothers did it. They're fantastic. They specifically worked on a lot of Mike Flanagan's work, Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Bly Manor, The Fall of the House of Usher, I think Dr. Sleep, like pretty much everything he works on, they do the score for, and they're fantastic. It's beautiful. I mean, that show is fantastic all the way through. And Disney recently put out the assembled kind of show, which it basically explains the making of it and kind of connects to some of the voice actors and all that stuff. And it's great. If you love the show as much as I do, as much as we do over on that X-Rated podcast, you will love it. It's a fantastic episode, and man, oh man, that soundtrack is great. It's beautiful. So check it out. Do yourself a favor. Admire yourself in the wonderful world that is X-Men 97, and continue to experience that with that soundtrack. Speaking of great experiences, though, why not talk about this episode? Get into it. You like that segue? I did. We get into it here and listen into my conversation with Keith Grachow.
And stuff for collectibles.
Yeah. The sun's kind of peering down on one of the gremlins there. It's hard to see, but they're they're like these NECA recreations of the puppets from the Gremlins movies. Mm-hmm. There's the stripper one you can see clearly there in the corner.
Oh yeah.
But various stuff are collected over the years. Yeah, you collector? Do you get toys or statues, that sort of stuff?
Not really. I mean, I'm more of a comic book collector, so um,
Oh, I'm that too.
yeah, I do have some. I used to work for a toy company way back, and so I have some of that stuff that I designed, and
Hmm.
um, around that time I would buy toys to see how they did the packaging. So I still have some of those as well.
Oh, really? That makes sense.
Yeah. Are we recording now? Is it
Yes,
starting?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I try to keep it as casual as possible, just to make it more like a conversation. So I don't always, I guess, give that warning. Sometimes I think to, but not always.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should have warned you when you came in, I think, but maybe not. Um, yeah. So where are you calling in from?
A little bit outside of Toronto, Ontario.
Oh, okay, right on. I'm in Nova
Yeah.
Scotia, so
Oh, okay.
yeah. So
Um, so now it is an hour earlier for
it
you.
is.
Yeah.
Later. I'm an hour later than you.
An hour later. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah.
makes sense.
Atlantic Standard Time for this guy. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's that weird Newfoundland one that's halfway. They get the half an hour difference, but we're
Right.
on the other side. Yeah, right on. So are you from Toronto originally?
I'm born in Montreal, but I grew up in the States and only moved back to Canada 22 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I saw that you'd gone to school in Florida, so I was curious about that because how did that happen? Your dad travel for work or something, or?
He was a U.S. Customs official stationed in Montreal, and my sister and myself were born there. So I got, Canadian citizenship, and because my dad worked for the U.S. government, I also had U.S. citizenship. And shortly after living in Montreal for a few years, we moved back to the States and gradually moved our way down from New Jersey to Florida over like a 13-year period.
Was
And then, as I said, I worked for a toy company in Florida, and I've been living there for about 10 years, and I decided I was done. Um, and
Well, is anything controversial happening in Florida right now? I'm unfamiliar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it wasn't like that 20 years ago. I mean, it's a little bit. I mean, there were signs of it.
Hmm.
So my biggest thing about living in Florida was initially I really enjoyed it. First 4 or 5 years was really cool, but I just wanted to have more conversations with people like me, artists and creators, and I was really not having a lot of success finding people like
Hmm.
that. So I couldn't really have conversations. I always, you know, talking about comic books or collectibles, and people would kind of their eyes would kind of glaze over, right? It just
Hmm.
wasn't something, they wasn't really anything that they were very interested in having conversations about. So, um, I just after a while, I was just like, like even working in a toy company, you'd think that I'd be able to have that kind of, connection, and I didn't. Like there were
Really?
people there that were just it was more business.
Yeah.
So, um,
That's interesting. I went to Florida for like my wife and I's gone a couple times, mostly just to go to like our honeymoon. We went to Disney and Universal Studios, and then we went back a few years later. I want to go back to the Star Wars stuff at Disney, but we haven't made it back down yet. But I thought that about Orlando a little bit too. I've only been to Orlando, so um, I was looking around like online to see what comic shops. 'Cause I always look when I travel to find this sort of stuff, and I couldn't really find anything. They had Hulk Hogan's merchandise store, but that was about all I could come across. That was something I might be mildly interested in. So there wasn't much. Like I couldn't. There's a cool little like bars that had like arcade machines and stuff, but I couldn't really find much that was like really nerdy.
so I've go back periodically. My family lives there still, and I do shows there
Hmm.
periodically. So I'll do like Florida SuperCon or something like that. And there still really isn't a community in the way that there is at least in Toronto.
No, there's one here too. It seems like there's one in most cities. It's weird that that's like the omitting one that you
Yeah,
know.
there are a couple of companies out there that like comic book companies like Scout or a Mad Cave.
Oh yeah, I've heard of
When
Man.
I was living there, there was one comic book company in Boca Raton. And I always forget the name of it. They did like they had like licensing deals with like William Shatner.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
it's
I
slipping
can't
my
think of it either.
mind.
Yeah, it's slipping mine too.
There was another one as well that was cross gen was it was in that may have been Orlando or Tampa, but that was there I think after I'd left or just towards the end of when I was there. But yeah, I didn't really meet anybody. Just a few people that were into comic books, and it wasn't enough for me. And
Hmm.
so um, I wanted to change. I just needed to change, and I had an opportunity to move back to Canada. My sister started working at a company in Toronto, and she needed a roommate, and I was like, oh, sure, why not?
Hmm.
Um, and almost immediately, like I went to what it was Hobby Star uh, comic book convention, which is now the Fan Expo.
Hmm. Oh yeah, it's huge. That's a huge event.
Yeah, and this show was pretty big. I had been to a couple pretty big shows prior to that, so it wasn't like it didn't blow me away in size. But what was really cool about it was that um like I remember seeing posters for like a comic book club, and I was like, oh, this is promising. Like there's actually people out there wanting to meet to get together and talk about comics. And I took the flyer and contacted the person organizing it and started going to the club. And through that I met people that I'm still friends with to this day. So almost right away, I think I'd moved to Toronto in July of 2001.
Hmm.
So was it August, I think, or early September when they had the show. And yeah, right. It was like a couple months it took me to start finding my people.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have quite a few folks in on this show that are involved in the comic scene in that live in Toronto, and it seems like there's a nice community. Like there's a lot of people, industry, like people that are in the industry or people that are just kind of on the indies or whatever. But it just seems
Mhm.
like the community is really nice. Like a lot of them will tell stories about kind of getting their ins to other people that eventually got them to like Marvel or something through like drink and draws or those sort of things. And it's cool. Like it just sounds like there's a really solid group of people up there.
Yeah, you're friends with Dave Cutler, right?
Yeah, I actually used my roommate
Yeah, so
years
so
ago when he
yeah,
was out here going to school.
okay. I went to school with him too. So
Oh, really? Oh, that's awesome.
yeah. Well, when I was I get approached by podcasters quite frequently to
Hmm.
do, and I mean, I love doing these, but I want to know who you are first, right?
Oh, sure.
If I don't know who you are, I don't want to be, there's some podcasters that are about the gotcha, or
Oh
whatever.
God, God, not me. Yeah, far from me. Yeah.
So I did a little due diligence. And I saw that you knew him, and I was like, okay, well, I'll reach out to Dave. And he's like, oh yeah, great guy. It would be a really good show to be on. I'm like, okay,
Oh,
and to your point, I trust Dave. I know who he is, and I think that he knows about safe space. So that's the kind of community that we live in, right? We
oh,
we
that's
offer
awesome.
you ask each other, hey, this new industry, this new person coming around, doing podcasts or a new company, that's promoting comic books or
Mhm.
whatever. What do we know about them?
Yeah,
And so we're all about, not, and it's not just necessarily like, oh, there's something we're looking to make sure they're not going to be bad.
oh
It's
yeah,
more like there's a new comic shop that just opened up. Let's all help promote it,
yeah,
right?
oh yeah,
We're all about that. We do that all the time. And we'll, at least I always try to spread the word if there's a new comic book shop or some new creator who's looking to where do I go for some marketing, and that's something that, as I said, 20 something years ago, I had that opportunity to meet people that were like me, and they helped me, guided me in directions to get my career going. And so that pay it forward mentality um, has really been pervasive in Toronto. And it's a great, it's just that's one of the things I really love about it. We're a great community in that way.
Yeah, for sure. And and also like, when you're into something like, I guess the world has kind of evolved into a way that like comics are more than just the small nerd community that like comics, with
Mm.
the movies and everything else has kind of exploded beyond that. And whether those people are reading comics, I mean, that's, I guess, a different point. But the idea that, still, I think a lot of people that are really into comics, and especially of a certain age, are still kind of like, remember the time where it was hard to find people to talk to you about comics, looking for your community and trying to find them. And it's funny because community comes up a lot in these conversations with people because, we're all trying to find our people. And when you're really into like fantasy, sci-fi, comic stuff, sometimes if you're of a certain generation, like I'm 38, so, growing up in school, it was few and far between, especially me, like I grew up in a very small community here in like in rural Nova Scotia. So it's like you don't, and we didn't have the internet really until later on to get that online community as well. So like it seems that mentality is carried through with a lot of people that are in the industry or at least creators to like look out for each other and try to support other comic shops and stuff like that. Keep the
Yeah.
things you love going.
Yeah. And to your point, like, I do remember a time when, I mean, I've been rewatching Big Bang Theory and, the whole thing. I mean, this is what, 2008, 2009, 2010, some of those earlier episodes when Penny would go into the shop and all the men would stop and stare.
That's
And
one thing I hated about that show. It's like they
yeah,
always, yeah,
yeah, exactly. I was
yeah,
like, well, I mean, it was like that kind of, at least from my experience, or, in the early 90s where
yeah.
it wasn't overtly like, that uh uh
Yeah, I don't think they would feel uncomfortable, but it certainly would be uncommon to see like an attractive
yeah,
woman standing in a comic store.
yeah,
You know.
it was for sure. It was one of those things where it was cool, and I've always been of the mentality of like, the more the merrier.
Yeah.
I don't really
Oh
care.
yeah. Well,
But
that's what bothered me about it because I didn't want to like I hate that perpetuating that stereotype that like, you know, comic spaces aren't like women can't go there. There's nothing women will enjoy in a comic shop. There's tons of comics that are geared towards women, of all, genders, ethnicities, whatever. So it's just funny that like I guess that show always seemed a little to me it seemed a little like the joke is just that they're nerds and then like like they're playing D&D and that's the joke is something really clever about it or something like I didn't hate the show. I just like some of that nerd stuff would bother me a little in a way that it'd be like it felt like it was about a decade behind as far as like where the nerd community had come as
yeah,
far as like being a wider branch of people going into the shops and supporting them because like Strange Adventures in Halifax like that's kind of my shop and
mm,
you go in there anytime and there's all kinds of folks in there. And it doesn't matter, women, men, varying levels of attractiveness and not whatever, like it's just,
yeah.
it's a broad community. So it was, yeah, it's an interesting time. So when did you get into comics? Like when was that? When was that? When did that spark?
I don't know the exact year. I
Oh man.
talked about before. I've talked about my first comic book that I remember was the one that I created was drew like a Godzilla comic book when I was like 5 or 6 or maybe
Nice.
older. I can't remember exactly.
I'm
I
so
do
impressed you
remember.
had that much of a Godzilla knowledge at 5 or 6.
I still want again. Maybe I was older.
Oh, whatever.
I feel like that's around the age I was, but I just remember loving uh like the comics I distinctly remember getting when I was starting the collection were like X-Men, Amazing Spider-Man, and that would have been when I was at least 10 or 11. But if you had to push me on when I started reading comics, I was probably reading comic strips. Like I would read Heathcliff and Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes and Bloom County, all that kind of stuff. I remember reading that pretty, like the Sunday comics.
Hmm.
I remember reading that kind of stuff pretty young. And even they had some of the little collected Garfield and
Oh
Heathcliff
yeah.
books that you can, read like the collection of Sunday comics or the dailies or whatever. Um, so those are for sure some of the earliest kind of comic book type sequential stories that I was reading. Um, if in regards to like the first comic book, the proper comic book I got, I don't remember,
No,
honestly. Don't know what it is. I have memories of the one that stands out, and I've told this before on some podcasts, are going to my cousin's, and I may have, again, maybe I was 11, 10 or 11, and he had like a box of like Captain America and Punisher, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. And I think he may have had like a double here or there that he gave me or something like that. So that may have kind of started my collection, or
Mhm.
started to get me introduced to other comics. And then this is like the thing that I still dream about to this day, is finding somebody in your neighborhood who's got like a long box of comics and they just want to get rid of them, and they're like, here's the whole box for $50. And you're like, there's like some really good comics in here, don't you know
Mhm.
that? I just want to get rid of it. And I had that. It was one of my neighbors. um I don't even know, I don't think I even knew the person. I don't know if it was just like somebody was like, hey, somebody's selling comics down the street, and all the kids would like rush to the person's front yard, and they had a garage sale. And so I just remember bringing all of my allowance and like, you know, buying a bunch of X-Men and Amazing Spider-Man, whatever else I could, that it caught my eye. And that collection that I bought from that person really started my collection. And
Nice.
because, you're I don't know if I would have, I don't think I necessarily had any knowledge of the X-Men prior to that. But it's maybe other than through like Spider-Man and his amazing friends, like Iceman and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But when you get like there's like 10 or 15 of them in a box, and you're going, wow, I want all of those. And so now it starts to, you're like, well, now I need to get more of them,
Mhm.
right? That kind of gets you on that path to like
Yeah.
looking for that particular comic book.
Mhm.
And I happen to really like the X-Men, but I just wonder if there had been like a run of, like Superman or something, would I have gotten more into Superman? Because I didn't really get into that kind of stuff till, maybe 6 or 7 years later.
Mhm.
So those comics that I found there really started me on my path to getting the comic book runs that I now still collect to this day,
Yeah.
like Uncanny X-Men, Amazing Spider-Man,
Well,
stuff
it's
like
either fortuitous or a curse, I guess, that you picked a series that is so popular and has so many books that you're gonna, you'd be buying forever. Like if you had
that.
got Micronauts or Strike Force Morituri or some series that had like a
Yeah,
20 issue run that you get pretty quickly, you cap it off. You're like, all right, that's it. But with X-Men, you'd be going forever, like
yeah,
which is great if you're a collector, man. Yeah, I
yeah,
believe me. You don't have to describe the collector mentality to me. I totally understand. Um, I've been, I'm like that when I get something. Uh, I have to watch myself because I collect records, I collect Blu-rays, I collect comics, I collect, like that sort of thing. So every once in a while, it's like you got to put a cap on it for a little while because otherwise, it's just you will have no money for all the important stuff you need.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that's
true.
cool. So are your folks supportive of your avid comic collecting as a child?
Yeah, they never. My dad, he, uh, so his parents, or his mother, my grandmother, she was really very strict when it came to, um, like disciplining in regards to school and stuff. You gotta,
Hmm.
study and be, very regimented and all that kind of stuff. And so, um, and it was for him, it was playing the violin, being like a master at the violin.
Oh wow,
And
that's a hard one.
yeah, and he eventually, he hated it so much. And it's the day he like left school, he stopped playing the violin. And I think that he wanted so there's always been the arts in my family. There's always been culture in my family. Like
Mm.
again, my grandmother was into culture and stuff, but in a way where it almost turned you off of it.
Yeah,
And so my parents were very much like, do what you want to do.
yeah.
Not gonna like whatever makes you happy, whatever, and they were pretty much, they didn't really push me in any direction in regards to
That's sweet though. They broke the cycle, right? Like that's terrible
yeah,
to force something on a kid so much they don't want to do it. Like
Yeah.
especially if they have proficiency for it. Like maybe if she wasn't so strict, he may have enjoyed it, may still do it. But if it
Yeah, that's one of those things. I'm like, Dad, do you ever want to pick up violin again? He said, nope, never. Uh, and yeah, so I guess they just let me be me, and um, every kid likes to draw and be creative with craft and stuff. And then at some point, kids get distracted by other things like sports or whatever. And
Mm.
I didn't. I just my personality was just very much of a insular, introspective. I liked to create things in my imagination, and that was what I would do all day long, like go to school, come back home and just create stuff. And yeah, they let me do it. And when it came to like collecting comics or GI Joes was another thing. Yeah, there was never any kind of like pushback in regards to how much money are you spending on this, or this is a waste of, you could be doing something else. They uh other than making sure I got out and exercised somewhat.
Hmm.
But I was a bit of a chunky kid, so it
Yeah,
didn't.
well, it kind of comes with the territory for the archetypes usually when you're kids.
Yeah.
I know for me
Uh,
too. But
yeah.
so like I guess when you started drawing and stuff and getting into doing, was that always along the way? Like were you always drawing your comics and stuff as you got into collecting them as a kid, or was that like when you got older, did that carry on that way? Because like you mentioned you worked in a toy store and stuff. Did you go to school? What did you take in school, like in college?
Uh, well, I went to school for graphic design, and it
Oh,
was a
nice.
it was a toy company that I worked for that actually designed toys.
Hmm.
Um, just to kind of go back to the first part of
Sure. Yeah.
you're talking about there. Um, so I'd mentioned I did that Godzilla comic book.
Hmm.
I liked st telling stories, and I guess in the way of like I would I don't know if you ever did this, but I used to collect GI Joes, as I mentioned, and I always thought of other GI Joes that could be. And so, until the first generation of GI Joes, you couldn't like unscrew the backs really. Like
Hmm.
there was like something preventing it from being able to take them apart. So I
Yeah.
I remember drawing my own GI Joes and cutting them out. Like I would put tape on top of them to make them stiff.
Hmm.
And this way I had like if I wanted, loads of like like Cobra soldiers, excuse me. Um, then I would have like a whole army of them, and I would create
That's
these
cool.
whole like scenarios, like storylines of what the GI Joes would be going through. And of course, this kind of may have riffed off the show, or may have riffed off the comic book. I can't remember. And I did that with other things. I remember doing that with the Smurfs and doing it with Transformers. I only collected really GI Joes. Uh, I had maybe one or two of the other things.
Hmm.
So I would just create like whole villages of Smurfs and create whole different, like all the different adjectives I can think of for a type of Smurf,
That's awesome.
and create like storylines, and use clay to make, buildings or what. And so I was doing this in a very visual way. And I think that comic books are, I could have, I guess, gone into like, creating, doing puppeteering or something like that,
Hmm.
or something, another kind of visual storytelling medium. But comic books were just there, I guess, and were the easiest access for me to create ideas.
Hmm.
So I didn't really, I always fantasized about being a comic book creator, but I didn't really do it very seriously
Hmm.
until I was in my mid to late 20s. Um, it took me a while to uh, get to a point where I don't know, got out of my own way, I guess.
Hmm.
So to get to the second part of your question, I eventually decided to go into some kind of art in university, but there was no comic book uh, like courses in Florida. You
Hmm.
could do like Joe Kubert had his correspondence, excuse me, Just to let you know, I have a little bit of like I don't know if it's allergies or cold or something.
Oh, no worries.
I'm I'm still getting over that, and my voice is a little bit.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, it's that time of year. I was just mowing the lawn outside, so it's
Yeah.
kicking up around here. So,
But so I wanted to be a comic book artist uh, for years, but I just made excuses, to be
mm,
honest. And I wasn't really trying hard enough and I don't know if it was just fear or distraction. But I did want to make sure that I still had my toe dipped within the creative arts. So going to school for graphic design, and the rationale behind it was, well, at least I get a job right away, because at that time there was huge demand for graphic artists create. It was the early stages of websites. It was early Adobe like platforms with the software. So being able to create like you know cards and
no, yeah,
posters was really
yeah.
pretty quick and easy at that time because of the software. And so there's a lot of jobs for that kind of thing. So I was like, well, that's the most obvious thing. If I want to, at least get into the arts, I'd be able to get a job doing graphic design pretty easily.
Mm.
That was my rationale behind it. But it was really fear that got in the way of me being a comic book creator for at least 7 or 8 years.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I had the same path, and then probably the same reason. Actually, never really thought about it before, but listening to you talk about it, I'm a graphic designer as well. Um, that's what I took in school. But yeah, it's the same sort of thing. You think about something that could maybe help with that, but like it's one of those things that you're too scared to just jump fully into it because it's scary, to try to make a world
yeah,
in art, especially at least that's something you can fall back on. At least the skills you learn in it, like all the stuff that comes with using those programs can help in creating
yeah,
comics and stuff. So, it's not a bad impulse, but I understand 100% what you're saying.
yeah.
So, so that led you to the toy company. Is that what happened after school or?
No, it was circuitous.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I When I was in school, I actually got a job. I actually got my first graphic design job while in university.
Mhm.
Um, because I was at the age where traditional and digital were just starting to be together.
Mhm.
So digital was being introduced into the schools with Photoshop and all that kind of stuff. And so we were one of the earlier classes to take advantage of the digital aspect of design. So I was trained with traditional, but also started with digital.
Oh,
And I
cool.
just really loved Photoshop. There was just something about it that was really cool. And I had a classmate who was working at uh, it's like some kind of software company that they really just needed like somebody to uh, be an extra set of hands for if they needed help with like certain. I can't even remember exactly what I was doing. It was like um, I remember they needed to be able to see what like certain kinds of circuits looked like, or certain kinds of like hardware looked like, and they needed somebody to help design it
Mhm.
graphically. And so this my classmate, he was doing that, and sometimes he needed somebody to take some of the real more mundane things off of his hands while he was doing it. And since he knew I was really getting into Photoshop, he's like, well, you can basically learn Photoshop while you're at the office, and if I need you for something, I'll just let you know. And I'm like, hey, I'm getting, so you're paying me basically to learn Photoshop? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. And that's what I did. Like I just for weeks, that's all I would do is I would just learn Photoshop, and then he would throw me something to do, which really wasn't that complicated. And then so I had a lot of time to work.
Wow.
And
This would be like what version of Photoshop would this have been? Like the first?
like I think it was like the second or third. It
Wow.
wasn't. It was 90. 95, 96,
Oh yeah, so way early.
96. Yeah, somewhere in there. Maybe it was number three, something like that. So yeah, so that was like my first. It wasn't technically my first job as a paid graphic artist. My parents hired me to draw a cover for a magazine they owned in the late 80s. So that was my techno when I was 13. But this was like I felt like my first real graphic design job. And then out of school, I would pick up freelance work. I'm sure you're familiar, just
Hmm.
business cards and
I have my
posters.
own business now, so it's a lot of that stuff. That's what I do
Yeah,
a lot of. So,
yeah,
your
yeah.
parents own a magazine? What kind of magazine?
Um,
You
they
know,
they
we're not going to go
owned
deep into it. I'm just curious.
no. It's they my dad, after he did the U.S. Customs, he got out of that for a while. He had an opportunity to, in the early 80s, when cable was becoming widespread, at least in the United States,
Hmm.
in my area, which was in New Jersey, there was a real need for like the TV guides,
Oh yeah.
right? Which listed, like what was going to be on every week, and they had a bunch of to be able to make sure that these TV guides were profitable. You had a bunch of advertising, all the different stores that would put their advertisements into the TV guides.
Hmm.
And initially they just had the national TV guide was the more well-known one, and a lot of companies were going, well, we need regional
Hmm.
versions of it. And so my dad was getting into that in the early 80s when all these regional TV guides were coming out all over the United States to fill,
Oh,
the need
cool.
of the area,
Interesting.
right?
Yeah.
So my dad started one in Central Jersey, and then we moved to South Jersey, and that's where um, uh, he, I guess, was like was known to be like the Jersey Shore TV guide.
Okay.
It's called EG,
Hmm.
and so
Well, hopefully he got out of it before TV, cable.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah, he got out of it in
Oh, interesting.
the early 90s.
So,
Um,
hmm, yeah.
so
So
I just did
free.
one of the covers for it.
All right,
That
cool. That's pretty cool.
was like the Hulk at the beach or something, or
That's
some.
sweet. I love that. Like some of the art in those old TV guides. Like I was looking at something that came up recently because I'm into horror stuff. I mean, it's not like my whole identity, but I really like horror stuff. And it was like I think Bernie Wrightson did like a cover for TV Guide for um when Mick Garris did that miniseries version of The Stand, like in the early
Mhm.
90s, and it was like a beautiful cover. Like,
Mhm.
there's some really cool, like neat kind of pseudo comic art in some of those covers from back in the day on like TV Guide and stuff. It was really cool. Like I remember seeing that and go, man, that's cool. It's like just even as a shining poster by itself, it was really, really cool. I think
Yeah,
it was Bernie Wrightson. It was somebody like that, but I think it was Wrightson.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really neat. So you're picking up odd jobs here and there, making your way through your graphic design career?
Yeah, yeah. So I was doing more of the like, yeah, more logo, more type design type things, and not really my thing. Like I knew how to do it. I had an understanding of design. I understood color theory and all that kind of stuff, but I really wanted to do more illustrative work. And there's not a huge amount of people. They just wanted like, or I guess maybe a better way to put it is, I don't know if I was confident enough to do some of that more illustrative stuff that somebody would want to pay me to do,
Hmm.
uh, and that I would, like, because it could take a long time to do some of that stuff, and to get paid like appropriately for it. Whereas
Yeah.
like doing the design, just more type, um, or more vector based type of simpler logo art
Hmm.
was much more profitable. So initially that's the more the work I did. Every once in a while I would get like thrown like a more of a illustrative type of thing, and I really liked those jobs. And then I think around I'd been so freelancing for a couple of years, and I think through my comic shop, actually, through my local comic book shop, and it's called Past, Present, Future. And
Cool.
the manager there introduced me to this guy who had just opened up he bought like a what had been like a discotheque, and he wanted to turn it into like some kind of sci-fi themed, like dance club.
Interesting.
So yeah, and so
That's cool. I don't know how much money it would make, but that's cool.
well, here's the thing. So I feel really bad to this day, but the guy, the manager of the shop introduced me to this guy. The guy was like, "Sure, let me see some of your portfolio stuff," and I showed him whatever I had done. He's like, "Okay, yeah, I think we can work with that." And he wanted me to do like concept art, and then he actually also wanted me to like paint the walls in the club, and it was pretty good pay. But I the part of it that I felt really bad about was that I'm like, and I need like material, right? I need like markers and stuff to like design this. And I think I probably bought way more markers than I needed. Like I felt I probably, I mean, now today it's not a huge deal, but back then
No.
it's like maybe $100 of markers I didn't really need. And he's like,
Yeah.
markers? I'm like, at the time I felt like I did.
Yeah.
I was like, I might need this color. I don't know. And then afterwards, after I thought about it, I'm like, I probably didn't. Now I feel bad that, but whatever. It's price of
You
closure.
just see him when the shop's closing up. He's just like, if only those markers didn't cost so much, we could have made a go of it.
And see, here's the thing, that actually happened, and that's how I felt. Yeah, it was
Oh, I'm
hard.
sure. I'm sure the $100 wouldn't have saved him. It's
Yeah,
fine.
I know, but
Yeah,
the
but
thing is
just,
it might have closed down like 2 years later, and I'm like, I haven't charged so much for marketing, you know.
he's sitting on the street corner with his head in his hands. The markers, they fucked me on the markers. It's really
Yeah,
good.
that was a cool experience because
Yeah, that would be really neat.
he let me I can't remember if he had like a concept. I think he probably was like, it's like Flash Gordon meets like Buck Rogers type of vibe, and
Mm.
so I'm like, oh, okay, this is really cool. And so it was like, I think it ended up being like Johnny Neutron was the name of, or something like that, was the name of the club. And the character was it ended up being more like a Buzz Lightyear type character, but
Mm.
um yeah, so I designed that concept for the character, and then I did a bunch of, actually drew, it must have been like a 10 by 20 foot wall, or larger. I helped, like actually like lay it out so that we can paint it onto the wall,
Mm.
right? And I learned how to do that in school, where you I don't know if you know the Raft of the Medusa. It's Delacroix, I think, is the painter. I could be wrong. It's like a 17th, 18th century painter, and you had to like paint. It's like a 20 by 30 foot painting this painter had made, and one of the projects in school was you had to recreate it, and
Oh
so
yeah, yeah, yes, yeah. I know the painting.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it
Wow, that'd
was.
be quite that'd be quite a project. Holy crap.
But that was a learning experience for me, to be able to take something that, like you started off small,
Mm.
graph it out, and then all you're doing is proportionally making it larger. And
Mhm.
that's all I did with this, my concept art. I just took that lesson and did it for the club.
No, cool.
Yeah, that was a really cool experience. I wish I'd been able to do more of that kind of stuff, but I mean, it allowed for me to have those portfolio pieces that would help me get other jobs,
Mhm.
right? And so eventually, um, I worked odd jobs here or there as a graphic designer, and often it's like who that
Mhm.
helps you get you a job. And my dad, I guess, my dad was talking to somebody in our building that we lived in, and they were looking for somebody to do graphic design for toy company that they were working at. And I was like, I'll go in and interview for it. And I got the job. I didn't my boss thought I had more qualifications than I really did.
Oh,
And I don't remember. I didn't embellish.
yeah.
He made assumptions. He thought I had more traditional training
Hmm.
than I let on. I mean, I did have traditional training, and I did have some of my portfolio pieces that were traditionally created. But you know, like, I don't know what he was thinking, that I'd had years of it or something, which I never told him I
Well,
did.
you're probably a young man at that point, right? Like,
I
so
was I was in my mid 20s,
yeah.
and um he so it was a cool company. They did, like, at the time when Britney Spears and Sync were like huge. We actually had the licensing for all of their toys.
Oh, cool.
So we were doing, or maybe not all.
Interesting. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, so we did the Britney Spears doll, and then Sync dolls, and Christina Aguilera dolls. So that's I was designing the packaging for it.
Must
And
be
my
a nightmare
boss,
working with the people, like their branding people. I assume everything has to go up the chain to them. They probably don't just let you guys do all of it and hope that it kind of turns out the way they want it to.
yeah, well, by the time I got there, they've been around for like 3 or 4 years. So
Hmm.
they gave you character Bibles, or
No, yeah, okay. So yeah, it's been established there.
yeah, it was established for by the time I got on board. But yeah, it was very specific.
Hmm.
Like, you had to, there wasn't a whole lot of creativity in that, or initially, with a lot of that stuff, because you had to follow their guidelines so specifically. And my boss, for whatever reason, because he thought I had more experience than I did, he was like, after 2 or 3 weeks there, he's like, "You're doing really badly here." And I'm going on my honeymoon in a week, and I'm going to give you this package design to make sure you get it perfect, and it's got to go out to Hong Kong. And if there's a mistake within it, um, that's going to cost the company millions of dollars, because if it gets out on the
They
boxes,
reprint them all, yeah.
recall.
Yeah.
And I'm going to come back after 3 weeks, and if it's not perfect, you just don't even come back. And that was it. He was like, "If this isn't perfect, you're fired."
Hmm.
And I'm like, "Okay, well, I can either quit today and just be like, find somebody else to do this,
Hmm.
or I'm going to try to,
Trial
take
by
this
fire,
away
this.
and,
Yeah, yeah.
trial by fire this." And that was like the most stressful job.
Oh,
And that was just, it was like, I don't think I slept for weeks. I was at that job easily on a weekly basis, 80 plus hours, just
Jesus.
making sure I got all of it right. And it was perfect. I
Good.
mean, you know, uh, he came back. He wasn't like, "Oh, you did a great job." He's like, "You're still here. Well, you can keep on staying here." Right. That was it. And
Wow. Well,
it was,
hey. Oh, I used to work in one of my first jobs at a school was at a polymer plate making place. So like a soup can, like the label, they would make the plates that would go to the company that makes the label. So the plates they'd have to do for each of the CMYK, each plate for each one. So you'd have to
yeah,
isolate them all and do all that sort of thing. And I hated it because like I was so nervous all the time about recreating some old ad or some old label that if something was amiss and a
yeah,
million fucking can labels got destroyed, I would be responsible. And this little company that I worked for, this mom and pop organization would fold. The stress was too much for me. Like one time I messed up on one thing. I didn't mess up, like it didn't go out, but she was just going off on me a little bit about how potential detail is so important. And I remember thinking like, I get out of here because like I'm gonna lose it. Uh, or when it really gonna cost these people a lot of money, I'm gonna feel terrible about it. So yeah, I hear you, man. That's well, at least you made it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I did stay there for 2 years, roughly 2 years. And my boss, I remember, like, when I gave my notice, and we were doing, like, he took me out for like dinner and drinks, and he's like, "Listen, I know I haven't really been, like, most effusive boss, but you've gained my respect. And
No, that's good.
if you ever want a job back here again, or you need a recommendation, just let me know."
No,
And
that's
that
sweet.
was like the greatest thing, to
That's
to
awesome.
want his respect like that. Um, And then yeah, like when I gave my 2 weeks, and I eventually took all that experience and moved to Toronto and tried to, when I first got back to or tried getting jobs, it was like, well, I guess I should try for graphic design stuff again because that's what I know.
Hmm.
And I was just, oh, why am I doing this? Like this is an opportunity for me to try to really go for what I love to do, which is comic books.
Hmm.
And that's why eventually I just decided to not do graphic design anymore, not look for jobs like that, and just, if I'm going to work, I'll work as a server or bartender and just work on my comic book stuff on the side. And that's
Wow.
what I ended up doing. And,
Wow.
and as I said, I joined that comic book club, and we did like um, we ended up doing like an anthology. So that was my first like printed comic book stuff. And, eventually, over years, you meet more and more people in the industry, and you get certain kinds of, opportunities, and, you're doing it full time.
Yeah, that's awesome. So like I'm glancing through your site, looking at some of your work as well. And I was doing a bit of this earlier before we were chatting, and I love your style. It's beautiful. It's really fun.
Oh, thanks.
But some of the books you've worked on, like the I'm curious about the Golem one. This is one that's your own creation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that one came about. I was taking a comic book. Well, I periodically like to um, take classes,
Hmm.
just strengthen areas that I feel that I need to that are bugging me, that I want to get stronger in. Writing was one of those areas that I hadn't really done a lot of, and so I took a writing class with this online company called Comics Experience. And
Cool.
initially, I had like an idea that I wanted to develop, but they're like, "Listen, if you have an idea you want to develop, that's great, but this is only going to be like a 6 or 7 page story. So just focus on that for now, and then you know you
Take
can."
that to the other thing. Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to do? And I had, I think before that, I had done I'd written and illustrated a story for a Jewish anthology called Psy. And I was like, I kind of want to do more of that. Like, I'm culturally Jewish. I
Mhm.
want to see if I can do more of those kinds of stories that resonate with me. And that informed what I was going to do for this class. So I started researching, what would be a cool story within Judaic culture, and golems are really cool. And so I had,
Yeah.
um,
I think
I,
so too. That's why I picked up on it because, like, they're a neat part of like, and they get used in horror, I guess, a little bit. Like one of the first horror movies was the Golem, wasn't it? Like the original silent black and white movie.
yeah,
So it's just like it's a cool concept. I know Steve Niles did like a neat little graphic novel called Breath of Bones. That was really
yeah,
cool, like a World War II sort of thing involving Golem. But I've always loved I have the collection of that one. But I've always loved the concept and thought it was really cool and unique and one that doesn't get mined a lot in horror circles. It does, but not. And it's also like a deeply Jewish thing, which is cool. Like
yeah,
that it gets used in that regard to, as far as like culturally, a lot of the stories that come out of that are all really unique, but like that one always seems cool. And,
yeah,
and sort of, so I love that you picked up on that because I always thought it was I always sort of enamored with the concept of the golem myth. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I initially, it was, as I said, it was a 6 or 7 page story. And we wrote it, and then they're wanting to do an anthology,
Hmm.
comic book anthology. And so I was like, well, I mean, I'd love to, illustrate this too. And so they're like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And so that's how that came about.
That's awesome.
The anthology never came out, but we were given permission to do what we wanted with it. So I decided to print it and print it. I put the original script in and some process art, and yeah, I mean, that's probably the first thing I did that where I was like, for the most part, it was completely mine. I've always been like a team player
Hmm.
since I've been doing sequential art. And so this was the first time I did get guidance obviously through the comic experience class, but for me to be able to like put this thing together without really having anybody else to look over my shoulder to go, okay, yeah, now this take this, and then we're going to do this, and blah blah blah. That was really cool. And someday I hope to get back to that story. It's just an origin story of the character. And I'd love to. I already have it's all developed in regards to
Awesome.
like the graphic novels that I would get to at some point. But yeah, and I do like researching for some of the stories I do. It's one of the things that um, is really fun if you can find a cool time and place and look into like what was going on at that time and place, and then create a story around that. I just, whether it's alternate history or something that really happened, that you can um, uh, do like a sequential story uh, that hasn't been seen before, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So what are you working on currently?
Um,
That you
got
can talk about, unless it's something, I always try to caution that if it's
yeah,
some folks are like, can't talk about certain projects. I totally get that, but whatever you're able to discuss.
yeah. Well, the one thing that I do yearly is saltwater. So I don't know if you saw that one. That's takes place in a colony in Mars starting in the 50s, and they believe the Earth has been destroyed at some point. But then something like 40 years later, one of the colonists, a 13-year-old girl named Meg, gets a message from the Earth, and she's like asking questions. She's like, have people known that it's been there this whole time? And my fellow colonists known about this? And she's asking questions, and over the each issue, she gets deeper and darker into some of these really bad, horrible secrets that some of the colonists have been hiding.
Cool.
So yeah, that's again, that one I haven't had to do a lot of historical research,
Mhm.
but it's there has been some opportunities for me to do it with the stories and that we're telling. So yeah, I work on that. We do one issue of that yearly, which is Kikamika Comics. Mitch Cook is the writer, and
Mhm.
we co-created this story together. Um, I've got something that I've been working on with my mom, which I've talked about before. We have a children's book series together, and we
Well,
wanted
that's
to,
awesome.
yeah, it's been a really cool experience working, with family in a way where you're creating something that's going to hopefully live on beyond us, right?
Mhm.
Um, and she wanted to do something a little bit more adult from the children's books that we've been doing.
Mhm.
And so we've been working on semi-autobiographical based off of her upbringing when she was like a teenager. Lots of the Jews would go up in upstate New York, then go from New York City to upstate New York to live in the Borscht Belt, the bungalow
Mhm.
colonies there, like where Dirty Dancing takes place.
Mhm.
So it's loosely based off of that story. So we've been working on this story for the last 3 or 4 years together. And
Oh, is that like
um,
do you ever watch The Marvelous Miss Maisel?
yeah,
Is
exactly.
that where they go when they go out? Okay,
Yeah,
cool. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I
Lenny
love.
Bruce used to do stand up out in the
Yeah, okay.
Catskills.
Yeah.
A lot of comedians and actors and entertainers would go to the Catskills in the summertime and do like a variety show or
Yeah. I love that
routine.
show. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
So those are they had hotels, and then they also had what were like bungalow colonies,
Mhm.
little houses where families, like you'd have all your family uh have property in like somewhere in upstate New York, and each like family unit would build their own little bungalow,
Mhm.
right? And they would go back to it every year
Yeah.
for the summer, from like 20s to like the 60s, 70s,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, yeah.
because
It's
you
cool.
had no indoor air conditioning, right? In New York
Right.
City in the summertime, it'd be sweltering in your apartment,
Mm.
right? So people needed to get out of the city to a cooler place, and that's why they would go out up to upstate New York. It's like cottage country, right?
Yeah.
Same kind of vibe.
Yeah, on the show they would go out there in the summers or whatever, and it was a whole
Yeah,
thing, like all the Jewish community stuff. Oh, that's cool.
yeah.
And the Sasquatch story, the refugee story, is that sort of I just noticed that one as well. Is that sort of something that's sort of unique to personal experience or something, or because you worked on with Mitch?
Yeah, Mitch. So saltwater is more of like just because it's like sci-fi.
Hmm.
There are some. I wouldn't say there's like a overall overarching morality to it.
Hmm.
It's more of just like a straight on story, sci-fi story, with very, very light morality, like themes pressed into it. He wanted to do something that was a little bit more like kind of focused, not necessarily like that you would like have to like be force spoon fed, but
Hmm.
just something, about the environment or about, like immigration, illegal immigrants, that kind of thing. So we decided, uh, well, he had come up with this idea called the dwell, which would it's this anthropomorphic characters living in alongside us, but we don't see them, right?
Oh,
Uh,
okay,
so
interesting.
we've seen that kind of thing before, but it's that kind of idea that like you blink and you think you see something out of the corner of your eye, and that's what you're seeing is like these like creatures that live in this other like I guess another dimension or another anyway. So this explains why we don't actually see Sasquatch
Hmm.
as frequently as because they every once in a while like they pop into our world, but then just as quickly they pop out, right?
That's really
Um,
funny. I was talking about that with somebody the other day. Paul Giamatti, the actor, has a podcast called
mhm.
Chinwag, where him and a philosopher just talk about like UFOs and Bigfoot and all this sort of stuff. And it's really fun. But at one point, somebody sent in a message saying that like his theory about where these monsters come from is they're not like the Loch Ness monster, for instance, isn't like a monster. It's the ghost of a plesiosaur or something
Mhm.
like that. And like this is his theory. And then like or Bigfoot's the ghost of, some early version of humanity that was around in the past. And then like Paul Giamatti's like, well, I posit this theory. He's like, what if there's like rips in reality and they're from other universes that come through? And
Yeah,
like the philosopher guy, who's like usually the voice of reason, is like, well, the Occam's razor idea that, it's just some creature in the woods we don't know what it is makes more sense. That seems like the obvious
yeah,
answer instead of there are holes in reality and there ghosts of Sasquatch are coming through them. Like it was so wildly insane, but it was so fun, such a funny moment on that show.
yeah.
Oh,
Well,
that's
yeah,
very cool.
and so yeah, that's kind of the idea of what we're
Yeah.
doing is that like so for us we get to play with um different times in history
Mm.
without having to like um have some kind of continuing story going. We can just like
Yeah, it's
pop in and
cool.
out, go. So this, they're all standalone stories. So this one that we did with the Sasquatch took place in like 1930s Washington State in the middle of the Depression, right?
Mhm.
The next one we're going to do, I think, is going to take place in the during World War One. So we're going to have that ability to decide when we want to, when and where. I think where is going to mainly be Washington State area because that's where he lives. He has a
Mhm.
lot of knowledge of like that, the history of that area.
That's where the
So
most Bigfoot sightings are.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the Bigfoot are going to be like the continuing thread throughout these standalone stories that we're going to be able to tell in regards to, again, some of them are going to be environmentally based or,
Hmm.
something having to do with, like uh, history and
Yeah,
how,
that's very
we're
cool.
going to be forced to repeat it if we don't actually learn from it, that kind of stuff, right?
It's a very
So,
relevant theme in our modern world right now, I'd say.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's very cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, I don't take up any more of your time, Keith. I was super happy to chat with you. Thanks for coming on the show.
I appreciate it.
That
Yeah,
was
just
awesome.
glad we're able to finally,
Yeah,
get together.
yeah. So my schedule is usually fairly straightforward, but I start working for myself about 6 months ago. And
Mhm.
generally, like, it plans out really well, but you know what it's like when you're doing your own thing. Every once in a while, something comes up and you got to go do it because it's money. But,
Yeah.
it's unfortunately, I much more enjoy doing this sort of stuff. So it's nice that we finally got a chance to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Keith. I look forward to checking out more of your stuff in the future.
Yeah, and let me know when this podcast comes out so I
It'd
can
be
like
about a
spread
couple
it
weeks,
on
but
the
I'll send you a link.
Okay,
Awesome.
awesome.
Thanks again.
Take care, man.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
There it is, my conversation with Keith Grachow, a great dude, great artist, some very, very cool work. I highly suggest you go check it out and dive into some of his really unique, fantastical work. It's beautiful, beautiful stuff. I love his style, and I think you will too. So if you're unfamiliar, go check it out. There's a lot of cool stuff out there, and a lot of great work to come. So great conversation and a great chat. Next week, I talk with James Aquilone, who is a editor and writer who does a lot of compilation books and some really, really cool art stuff as well. Great conversation, great guy. Real love of horror books and very New York kind of dude. So we have a great conversation about horror and horror and fiction and leading throughout his life as well, which is a great talk too. So make sure to tune into that in 1 week's time. The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.